Okay, we are at Directive 1, which is about minimum capital fund. So yesterday we have discussed about CAR and how CAR is calculated, what is a capital fund, what should be the minimum capital requirement of a bank or financial institutions. We have talked about the types of capital of bank or financial institutions. Then we have also recognized there are two types, that is core capital and supplementary capital, tier 1 capital and tier 2 capital. Then we have also studied what are the elements or what are the things that are under tier 1 capital and what are the elements that are under tier 2 capital. And we have also studied how the classification is made. Fine. So today, it is very necessary to describe the Basel. So let me tell you now, this Unit 1 or Directive 1 is entirely dependent on the Basel norms. And let me tell you, today's complete audio will be dedicated on the Basel norms, and stay in touch to understand all the Basel norms in a very simplified manner. Till now there are 3 Basel norms: Basel 1, Basel 2 and Basel 3. So we will be discussing all the Basels one after another. Fine, good. So let's revise. As I have told you yesterday, these Basel norms are formulated by Bank of International Settlement, also known as Central Bank's Bank. So Bank of International Settlement is also known as Bank of Central Banks. Good. And there is a committee. We call it as BCBS. What is BCBS? So it is a Basel Committee on Banking Supervision. So that's why it is called BCBS, Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, BCBS. So all the norms are formulated by this committee. We call it as BCBS. So Basel Committee for Banking Supervision, or Basel Committee on Banking Supervision. So till now there are 3 Basel norms: Basel 1, Basel 2 and Basel 3. Good. So let's talk about the first Basel, Basel 1. So what is a Basel 1? Basel 1 for the first time introduced the concept of capital adequacy ratio. So Basel 1 introduced the capital adequacy ratio. Yesterday we talked about the capital adequacy ratio, isn't it? So for the first time in the history of banking sector, it has introduced the capital adequacy ratio, CAR. Fine. So how we used to calculate CAR? Very simple. Firstly, what is the exposure of bank? Suppose bank is disbursing 2 billion loan, and if it has a risk of 20%, that means how we find the risk weighted asset? 2 billion into 20%. That will be a risk weighted asset. And as per the requirement of the bank or the regulation of the central bank, the capital is maintained. We have discussed in detail yesterday. But now the problem here is how to find how much risk is there. So how we are deciding that 20% risk is there while disbursing 2 billion loan? So that's the problem, isn't it? So how to determine how much risk is there while the bank is exposing as asset or the liability? So while disbursing 2 billion loan, how much risk is there? That's the matter. So when the Basel I was introduced, the entire concept, the entire risk was taken as a credit risk. So on the basis of credit risk, the risk-weighted asset used to be calculated. Very good. So that 20% or 10% or 15%, whatever the percentage is, that is calculated on the basis of just credit risk. Fine. But the CAR for the first time was introduced by Basel I. So there was no perfect measurement for calculating risk-weighted asset, as it was entirely dependent on the credit risk. So this is what the Basel I was about. Do you think it is a fair concept of calculating risk-weighted asset just on the basis of credit risk? Is there only a credit risk in banking sector? So there are so many things you have to understand. There is not only a factor of a credit risk that exists in the banking sector. There are so many things. So Basel II has introduced two more risks. One, the operational risk, and the number two, the market risk, along with the credit risk. So while calculating CAR and risk-weighted assets, now the banking sector has to undertake these three risks: credit risk, market risk, and the operational risk simultaneously. For instance, if there is a credit risk of 5%, market risk of 10%, and operation risk of 10%, now the total risk becomes 25%. So while calculating risk-weighted assets, you have to multiply the total exposure by 25%. But earlier, in case of Basel I, there was only a credit risk. You have to multiply only by 5% to the total exposure. That will give you a risk-weighted asset. So there is a difference. So what is the difference between Basel I and Basel II? The very first thing is Basel I only focuses on the credit risk, or you can say Basel I risk-weighted asset were entirely focused on the credit risk, but in Basel II, the risk-weighted asset or CAR is not only focused on credit risk, but it is also focused on market risk and operational risk simultaneously. The first change that was made under Basel II was introduction of two more risks in banking and financial sector. So this is, you can say, the amendment in the CAR concept. But Basel II also introduced two more stages in the banking and financial sector's supervision process, or reducing the risk process. So what are two other things? One is the supervisory review. Supervisory review, earlier times, none of the central bank used to supervise other financial institutions or the licensed financial institutions. Now, this Basel II says the central bank has to monitor and supervise the licensed institutions on regular basis. So supervisory review was another thing that Basel II introduced. The third thing is market discipline, or you can say the disclosure, or you can say the transparency. What does this mean? Earlier time, no banking and financial institution used to publish their documents in public, in newspaper, or in a book. But now it is very compulsory. The bank and financial institution has to publish, has to work very transparently. Fine. So that is the third concept introduced by Basel II. Now Basel II has 3 pillars. So what are the 3 pillars of Basel II? 1. The same thing in Basel I, but there are certain amendments, or you can say some corrections. Basel I only includes credit risk, but now credit risk, market risk, and the operation risk while calculating the CAR. So the first pillar is about capital adequacy ratio, and the second pillar is about the supervisory review, and the third pillar is about the market discipline and disclosures and transparency. So Basel II has 3 pillars. So now you can understand how Basel I and Basel II are different things. Now the problem is, even Basel II is not able to protect the banking and financial institutions from different threats. So here comes Basel III. Basel III also accepts all the contents of Basel II. So Basel III has also 3 pillars which were existing in Basel II, but it has added 5 more components. And what are they? 1. Leverage ratio. Number 2. Liquidity coverage ratio. Number 3. Net stable funding ratio. Number 4. Counter cyclical buffer. And number 5. Capital consumption buffer. So it has added 5 more elements. So remember, Basel I entirely depend on the credit risk and the CAR concept. Basel II, it has introduced operation risk and the market risk, and it has also added 2 more pillars, that is a supervisory review process and market discipline, that is a disclosure and transparency. And Basel III, existing with all these 3 pillars, it has added 5 more components or 5 elements to the banking supervision concept. So here are Basel I, Basel II, and Basel III differs. So we will study all the concepts, pillar 1, pillar 2, pillar 3, and the 5 other components in a very detailed manner in next part. Thank you. That has been added to Basel II to formulate a new Basel III. And there are some of the factors in capital adequacy ratio that has been changed in Basel III as well. So Basel III strictly focuses on liquidity risk. Remember, Basel III has the strict focus on liquidity risk, whereas Basel II has strict focus on operation, market, and the credit risk. Basel I has a strict focus on credit risk. So this is how Basel I, Basel II, and Basel III are different. But remember, when we will discuss Basel III, you will understand all the Basels and the concept of all the Basel norms and the 3 pillar concept very clearly. Fine.